about 9 months ago I put up an interview with Boal on my channel, which you can still view. I'll put the link in the sidebar. And I'd also linked an actual theatre piece that was done in New York. Just to go through what that piece was about, because I think it's a really good example of how relevant street theatre and invisible theatre is today. It was a group of theatre practitioners who did a piece in Madison Square Garden in New York in 2003. There was 12 players in total. 2 of them were playing the part of tourists. 2 of them played the part of Muslim women in full hijab, and 8 of them played the part of park goers. And obviously it was done in a very public area. The 2 tourists, they were acting out the part of stereotypical tourists. They were filming everything. They were being quite loud, just generally drawing attention to themselves so that people would actually get absorbed and involved in what was happening. So they really stood out to passers-by. They started to talk about the terror threats and about the Code Orange alert, which essentially, the government advising people to be vigilant of suspicious behaviour and to report things like that. Meanwhile, the 2 players who were in the role of 2 Muslim women, they were wearing full hijab, also in Madison Square Park, and they were there taking photographs of the Empire State Building. One of the actors playing a tourist starts to express alarm about the 2 Muslim women, saying that there might, there's a war on terror and yada yada yada. They might be filming in order to help some terrorist group somewhere, and they start basically going, being that kind of freaked out by what the media has been telling them, and they're pulling, audience members into it, saying, look what they're doing, we should report this. The Muslim women, on the other hand, are talking to other spectators and normal passers-by, asking them, do you think those 2 tourist guys over there, they seem to be filming us and we feel a bit uncomfortable about this? And they're generally expressing fear and discomfort about the fact that they're being watched and people are pointing at them, and they're kind of a bit freaked out by the whole thing. So you've got these 2 different situations happening at other ends of the park. Meanwhile, you've got the actors who are playing the parts of park goers, and they're basically there to stir up the discussion a little bit more, performing the role of an outside perspective, which really helps to increase other regular park goers, the spectators. It helps to increase their involvement because they see other park goers getting involved, so they're more likely to get involved, they're more likely to talk, and they're more likely to get involved in the discussion and be a bit more vocal. The Muslim women would leave, then the tourists would leave, and then eventually it would just be the park goers talking to other spectator park goers, discussing what had just happened, and basically, I guess, coming to a consensus about it, and coming to, working out the whole idea of how this media scare tactics affect people like the tourists, and affect the Muslim women, and to come to a consensus about it, to basically, in real time, in a real situation, to make their own minds up about it, because invisible theatre isn't about telling people what to think or telling them what they should feel about something. It's to basically bring people to a conclusion where they are actively engaging with the topic and actively coming to their own conclusions and doing something about it. Everyone who witnessed that day in Madison Square Park, they believed it was real, and they all walked away probably telling their friends and colleagues and family about what they'd just witnessed, because it was a real event to them, even though it wasn't a real event. But it could have been. That's the whole point. Now, what they actually said about the how that piece went, I'll read it out. Given the Code Orange atmosphere of fear currently permeating New York City, for example, there was armed soldiers on the street at the time, our group was careful in selecting the location. Ground Zero and the Staten Island ferry were deemed too dangerous for the Muslim members of our group. So we decided on Madison Square Garden. Our invisible theatre performance heated up very quickly until a large, angry crowd had gathered around tourists, many of them demanding that the video cassette be erased or handed over for destruction because they'd been filming the Muslim women. The question raised was whether or not it was acceptable for vigilante US citizens to follow the government's suggestions to racially profile Muslim women. I'm pleased to report that the answer from the public in this case was a resounding no. The Arab Americans in the group described the exercise as therapeutic because they witnessed so many people coming to their defense, and they're still continuing doing invisible theatre work in New York City to this day. So overall it was a real success, and that, you know, Boal said about the theatre piece that he suggested that if enough groups of people engaged in invisible theatre on a given day, on a given topic, it might be possible to transform the mental environment of an entire city, provoking its citizens into rejecting oppressive submission by becoming politically active. The beauty of invisible theatre is that, as with other techniques from the theatre of the oppressed arsenal, the theatrical rituals are abolished. Only the theatre exists. Without its old, worn-out patterns, the theatrical energy is completely liberated, and the impact produced by this free theatre is much more powerful and longer lasting. So that's kind of one example of invisible theatre and its outcome. But I'm sure there's a billion, zillion and one different ways that you could take that same topic and address it, or any topic and address it, just by creating a real event which engages people, and they will act on, and they will not only inform themselves about how they feel about a particular topic, but also through that kind of consensus making and engaging with each other, they're no longer being told what to think and told how to react to something, like in this case being told how to react to the terror threat, but actually putting a human approach into it, you know, and actually thinking about it in real time, what it means. So that's one example. I've got another example. There's a zillion and one examples of invisible theatre being used, and that have been used throughout the world, to highlight things that are happening in our society and attitudes that are in our society. And it's a really useful tool, I think, to employ in activism, because when you're standing at the side of the road handing out leaflets or DVDs or holding a sign or chanting a slogan, it's very easy for the public just to lump you into a bracket, into a stereotype, into a box, without actually really thinking about what you're saying. And there's too much information to get across half the time anyway, so that approach is kind of like the old school propaganda, this is the situation, this is what you should be thinking way of addressing it in the public and to educate the public. Sometimes it might be more fruitful to maybe look at the kind of styles of theatre, like particularly I think invisible theatre that Boal used, to make it something real, something that people will actually walk away emotionally affected by. Not necessarily in a bad way, but something that continues on as an internal dialogue, or something that they're more likely to investigate if they actually witness something that relates to it. I mean, when you think about it, there was a newspaper article a while back about the swine flu vaccine, and there was some kid who was, I don't know, he was in his early teens, or he's about 10 or 11, that kind of age, where they have an opinion and they're physically able to run out of the room, and this kid had to be dragged kicking and screaming into the nurse's office and held down to get the vaccine. It's one thing to read about that and to think, oh, that's terrible, but if you were another mother there witnessing that happening, the way it would affect your thinking, or the way it would stay with you, would be completely different to reading it in a newspaper. And that's why sometimes when you're faced with something real, it becomes more real. It becomes something that you feel a lot more passionately about. So I think theatre could be used as a tool, and it has been used as a tool really effectively. I mean, Boal didn't get locked up and tortured for nothing. They obviously felt that he was a real threat to the regime at the time.